Hello. I'd like to talk to you today about Ivan Pavlov, the early biologist. A lot of early psychologists were actually biologists who were studying something else. Pavlov was studying dog digestion. He wanted to know how the stomach worked, and obviously you can't use humans for that, so he had quite a lot of dogs. So the story goes is that when he walked back to the cage area or the pen area where he had these dogs, that they would start to salivate. Now, of course, if you have a dog or cat at home, you know, the answer is like, so what? It's not a big deal. That dogs and cats know when it's feeding time. They know what the sound of the bag sounds like. But for him, the idea that the animals would know when feeding time was just like, no, that can happen. This is so unusual that I want to study this further. So Pavlov set a experiment in which he made a slice into their cheek and then had a receptacle to catch saliva. So he would show the dog food. He had them in a kind of like a grooming, I don't know what it's called. It's where basically it forces the animal to stand up on all fours, that they can't lay down, and then would present them with food so they couldn't come over and eat it right away. So when presented with food, they would salivate. Well, then what he had, as I believe it was a tone, it wasn't a bell, at least not initially anyway. So he'd have the tone and then the food, and then he would feed the dog. So tone, food, feed the dog. Eventually, you can take away the food, right, and only have the tone, and the dog would salivate. So the neutral stimuli, the thing that the animal in the wild would not react to that it does now, is the tone. The tone is a neutral stimuli and then becomes the conditioned stimuli. That the food is the original stimuli. Now that food can be taken away, the response in classical conditioning is always the same. Whatever you start with, the reflex, that's important, the reflex you start with is in fact the reflex that you end with. He was an associationist. Behaviorism had not really become a thing yet, but for the most part, associationism, in my mind, is very close to behaviorism and are kind of interchangeable. Pavlov realized that the optimum time between the presentation of the real stimuli and the neutral stimuli is about a quarter of a second. So if you think to yourself, if you do this for me, I'll give you $1, but you do this for me today, and it takes me a week for you to get the $1, which is not a very good example. But the idea is, you might have forgotten. With money, maybe you hadn't forgotten, but or something else. Let's say that someone in your family does something and you get angry, right? What happens is, what happened if you decided not to be angry, you left the scene, whatever, and then a month goes by, and then you came back and you were angry. Well, the person's not going to make the correlation. They're not going to realize, oh, he went to cool off. So a quarter second. Now, if you're farther than a quarter second, maybe 1 or 2 seconds, is that going to make it so the neutral stimuli does not work? No, probably not. But the difference between the tone and the food being presented should be fairly close together. This is a prime example of house training, house breaking, I don't know, whatever you call it, an animal, like a dog, is that the animal has to be shown what it should be doing, and that's also important, not punishment, which we can talk about much later. But the time between the two has to be very close together. You can't wait too long. I think that's it.